Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
You are a noisy bunch of drunks. I'm Po' Boy Rice, and I'm an alcoholic. Hey, y'all. Sober today with the grace of God. Fellowshipping with men and women just like you, and because our program works. I want to take this opportunity to thank the committee for allowing me the privilege to be in your Great Plains Roundup. I'm also very grateful to have my wife with me here this evening to lend me a little support. I'm going to share something with you. I'm 75 years old, and yesterday's the first day I ever got on an airplane. Now, if you think that won't stir your adrenaline, you try it. And I don't want to embarrass you, honey, but Marie, would you stand up and let these folks look what an Alabama gal she is. I am a member of the Glen Haven Stone Mountain group of Alcoholics Anonymous in Stone Mountain, Georgia. My sobriety date is December the 12th in 73. Now that may not impress some of you folks out there, but it just tickled the hell out of my kinfolks. I think it's only fair to tell you in advance that I'm a little bit old-fashioned and I'm kindly countrified. And the only reason I tell you that is you never would have known it if I hadn't told you. And anytime I'm in a crowd this big, I think there just might be some cat out there that knew me before I got to this fellowship. And so I want to tell you a little story. And it's about an old buddy of mine. He lived over in North Carolina. And he stole a man's milk cow. And they gave him 12 months in chain gang. And when he finished his sentence, he was so ashamed of himself until he moved down in Georgia. He got him a job and he went to work. And he established such a good record in the community. He joined a little old Baptist church. And he established such a good record in the church until after a while they elected him to serve on the deacon board. And he served in that capacity for some time, and after a while the preacher resigned and asked this old buddy of mine if he would be the preacher. And he accepted. And on the first Sunday morning, he walked up in the pulpit to deliver his sermon. He looked down the aisle and he saw a long-legged joker come walking in that he used to be in the chain gang with. And he started his talk off something like this. Now, brothers and sisters, I came here this morning fully prepared to preach to you from the book of John. But after observing this great congregation, I have changed my text to the 2nd chapter of Jude, where it says, if you knows anything, or if you sees anything that ain't already leaked out, you keep your mouth shut till this meeting's over with. That's kind of the way it is with po' boy. Now, Hugh, I did quite a bit of research before I found out there ain't no 2nd chapter of Jude. But it works. Thank God we can laugh. I love to laugh today, and I love to see other people laugh. But when I laugh, I have to remember that one day I cried. How about you? Yes, Lord. Yeah. Don't have to cry no more. Thank God for a program called Alcoholics Anonymous. This is all I know, this is all I need to know, and it works. I was born 75 years ago over here in Rockdale County, Georgia. My old daddy was a moonshiner and a sharecropper. And I guess we was about the poorest folks was in the county. That ain't why they called me poor boy, I got that another way. And I suppose by the time I was about 10 years old, I could operate a liquor still as good as my old daddy could. I knew all the ingredients that went into a batch of beer that would cause it to ferment, and when it was ready to be distilled. Now, I learned this as a little old barefooted boy, and it came in real handy in later years. I well remember there was two things that always sit in the old kitchen where we eat, in this old farmhouse. One of them was a jug of shine liquor, and the other one was a jug of sorghum syrup. So other than becoming an alcoholic, I turned out to be quite a syrup sopper. And there ain't nothing wrong with sopping syrup. That book that Hugh talked about this evening talked about those resentments. I've done a lot of inventory in this program. Only today I call it soul searching. And I well remember, as a little old boy, the man that owned this farm that we lived on. Everybody lived on this farm with a sharecropper or made liquor. And he had a commissary, and when you need something from the commissary, these poor white folks and these black folks would go up to the commissary, and you didn't go to the front door. And I'd follow my old daddy around to the back door, and he would stand there with his hat in his hand. And he would say, would you please let me have this, or would you please let me have that? And I saw that, and I resented it. And I developed that attitude. I'll show you. I'll never beg. And I don't know how old I was when my old daddy moved us to Atlanta. And he moved into a part of the city that if you know anything about Atlanta, you know about this section. They called it Cabbage Town. It was a real slummy era, and it still is today. I think everybody that lived on the street we lived on was a produce peddler or a bootlegger. And every little old boy that I began to associate with was a graduate from a reform school, or he was a candidate for some reform school. If he hadn't been, he was on his way. Now, we've all been young at some time or another, and I say there's a lot of young folks here, and we do like to be accepted by the people that we're so closely associated with. And I'm no different from anyone else. I wanted to be accepted. And I began to do the things these other kids did. I remember when some of these kids' dad would get them a bicycle. My old dad was so poor he couldn't buy one, and I'd steal one. And a little while Later, some of these kids would get an old hot rod, and my dad couldn't buy one of those, and I'd steal one. And I always had just as much as the rest of the kids, but mine was all hot. Now, they don't do this over in Georgia today, but they did then. In March of 1929, I was 16 years old, and they had me up in that Fulton County courthouse. I found out the law frowned on some of them things I was doing. And I never will forget what that judge told my mother. He said, "I'm going to send your boy to the chain gang and let him see what it's like out there, and then I'm going to turn him back out, and I'm sure that your boy will be a better boy." And of course, we would believe anything anybody told us, especially the judge. And I went off to the chain gang, and I expected to get out that night or early the next morning. That's what the judge said. But it didn't work that way. They kept me 4 years. And so mixing and mingling with the people that I was so closely associated with, I became a real smart aleck. Now, I got another name for that, and you have too. I thought I had all the answers. 4 years later, I came back out on the streets of Atlanta, and I drank liquor day and night. I couldn't tell you how old I was when I had my first drink of liquor. I was probably in diapers. My whole family drank liquor, and everybody we knew drank liquor. And we didn't see nothing wrong with it. If it was possible, it seemed like my mother, she was just more than mama. She was like many mamas today. She upheld me in everything that I did. And then, like many young men today, I took my mother for granted. You're my mama, and you're supposed to do all these things for me. And I can well remember when she would walk in the rain or the snow down to an old chain gang camp to bring me a sack of Bull Durham smoking tobacco and say, "Mama loves you, and we hope they'll let you come home sometime." But this was Mama, and I took her for granted. And I didn't miss her until it was too late. Because just a few days later, in a drunken stupor, out on the outskirts of Atlanta, I wrecked the automobile and I killed Mama. And I never got over that for a lot of years, and a long ways down the road. I could hear Mama crying, and I could hear Mama begging and pleading, trying to get me to slow that car down, and I wouldn't do it. I was a smart aleck. I lost Mama. And then I began to run with some of the worst people in this country. A short time later, I was arrested, tried, and convicted. This time I was sentenced to over 100 years. And so back to the chain gang I went. My only hopes of ever being free again was to run out. And I run all my life and all over Georgia. And I escaped, or I attempted to escape from every institution I was confined in except the last one. Most of those men that I was so closely associated with are not around today. Some of them was killed trying to escape. Some of them were shot down out on the highways by the policemen, and some of them went to the electric chair. And so, my friend, it's by God's amazing grace that I stand here this evening and try to share a little of my experience, strength, and hope, and plant a few seeds that they might sprout out there somewhere. Listen to me, young folks. This was back in the days when they used the old sweat boxes and stocks in Georgia. And those sweat boxes was made like a coffin. It stood up on its end and you backed up into it. And they'd close that door right up against your face and they'd bore a hole in there so you could breathe. And you couldn't sit down and you couldn't turn around. And I've stood in those sweat boxes till my feet would swell up and bust my shoestrings. And those old stocks that they hung you in by your wrist, I hung in those stocks till the back of my hands were paralyzed for several years after these things were abolished in Georgia. And they whipped me with everything imaginable, and I continued to get worse because you don't win people like this. Sometimes today people will say, "Po' boy, how do you win 'em?" And I'll be glad to tell you. There's a little old four-letter word that says L-O-V-E, love. Thank God for this kind of love I'm talking about. This is why this is such a great fellowship, Patty, because of the love, the understanding, and the identity that one drunk has for another drunk. It wasn't too long until the federal government built a place over in Tatnall County, which is one of our state penitentiaries today, and they leased it to the state of Georgia, and they gave them 30 years to pay for it in. And the last year that Governor Eugene Talmadge was in office, he taken all the money out of the treasury and paid the government off. And the next morning, the newspaper said the state of Georgia now owns a state penitentiary, lock, stock, and electric chair. And I was one of the first convicts to enter that new prison in October 1937. And they locked me in a little cell for 8 months until they could open up a rock quarry for incorrigibles. And I was shipped over there for the next 3 years. But I managed to escape on 2 different occasions. And they sent me back to Reesville under what they call a stop order, never to be transferred out again. A short time later, we got a new warden down there, and out of 2,500 convicts, he picked 10 of us with the worst escape records and said, "Carry these men to maximum security. They'll never come back to population as long as I'm warden." We had a lot of friends, and we had a lot of connections. And 30 days later, we escaped from maximum security at midnight. We came downstairs and we captured the whole inside of the penitentiary. This never happened before, and it's never happened since. But it happened then. We'd taken over the front office, the switchboard, the powerhouse, and I walked down through those cell blocks with a market basket full of keys, and I turned everybody out that said they want to run away. And so I let 100 out. And we threw that main switch, and we had a complete blackout. The tower lights, inside lights, all went out. And there was 25 of us went out those doors and taken automobiles off of the yard and left. And the other 75 I let out went down and broke into the commissary and got all that juicy fruit chewing gum and brown mule chewing tobacco. They didn't want to run away. They were just full of larceny and wanted to steal something. And so the governor, he offered a $1,000 reward, dead or alive, for every one of us. And within another month's time, we were all back in jail somewhere, with the exception to one little old 17-year-old boy, and he got drowned in the river that night. And they started what they called an 8-ball squad. Our heads were shaven. We were placed out in a stump digging detail, segregated from the rest of the prisoners. And every state trooper in the state of Georgia had to come down there 10 at a time and do 10 days guard duty over this detail that they might know these men anywhere on site. We were not allowed any mail or any visitors. And of course we had no money, no lights in the cell. And so many of these men began to break their legs and to break their arms, and some of them cut their heel tendons, the heel strains. And some of them crippled themselves for life. And the word leaked out to the Capitol up there as how these men was crippling themselves. And the governor picked a group of men to come to Reesville, make an investigation, and recommend something to do about this. He picked the president of the Senate, the speaker of the House, a lot of judges, probation officers, newspaper reporters, and photographers. And one other man I'll never forget as long as I live. His name was Mr. Wiley Moore. Mr. Moore was a millionaire banker in Atlanta, and the governor asked Mr. Moore to head up this group. And he said the state of Georgia will back you men up 100% in any recommendation you make. And they came to Reesville, and we were driven out of these old muddy river bottoms into that old dark cell house. And Mr. Moore said, "Open the door, I want to go in here and talk to these men." And they said, you can't go in there, it's too dangerous. This was the first time in my life I had ever heard anybody talk about God in a respectful manner. Mr. Moore talked about the God of his understanding. He said he wasn't afraid to come in there, and he wasn't. They opened the door, and he came in, and we followed him to the rear of this old cell house, and we sat down in a big circle. And he sat down in the center of this group with tears just flowing down his face, and he brought us a message. He talked about the God of his understanding. He said, you can't buy this, it's not for sale. And the most amazing thing, he told me I didn't have to be good to get it. He said, it's a gift. Just reach out and accept it. And I could not for the life of me understand that kind of talk. But I had all the respect in the world for that man because he was for real. He said, I'm going to take these old stripes off of you and them old chains off of you. I'm going to let your hair grow out so you look like a human being. He said, I'm going to let you pick any job in this institution that you want, that you can learn a trade. It'll be worthwhile to you one day. He said, if any man in this detail would just do 5 years with a perfect record, I guarantee you a parole. What an opportunity. There was only one man in that detail that taken advantage of that great opportunity. He's the only one, as far as I know, other than myself, that's still living today. He's an old grandpa. He never got back in trouble. But you know what kind of job I asked for? I asked for a job down in the Stewart's department. That's where they got all that meal and sugar and syrup and yeast. Well, I think we're fixing to identify him. And out here you call it beer, but in the joint we call it buck. And it ain't nothing but old still beer. And I learned all about that stuff as a little old boy working around a liquor still. And so I became a professional buck maker. And I can assure you I drank alcoholic for a lot of years in the penitentiary. Folks say, po boy, how you get it in there? It's a whole lot easier to get in there than it is over where I live in Stone Mountain. You don't have to walk as far after it. I used that little extra privilege I had of mixing and mingling with the other convicts and scheming and plotting and planning. And after a while I got me an old pistol smuggled in there. And I come out of there one morning, I was so drunk I didn't know I was in this world hardly, and I enticed 5 of these other men to help me. We captured 19 of those free people and had them all tied up in haywire, using them as hostage, trying to go through the back gates with them. I wanted out bad. But I can honestly say to you this evening, thank God I didn't get through those gates that morning. I wouldn't have been living today. And anything that I tell you that happened to me, don't you feel sorry for me. I asked for every bit of it. And I was in this program for quite a while before I realized and accepted the fact that I'm responsible for my actions. It took a long time to get that in that thick head of mine. And so they stripped me off naked, and I was beat till I was bloody as a hog, and I went to the death house. And there I remained for the next 2.5 years, right in the shadow of the Georgia electric chair. They don't use that thing too often over there now, but during those years, the state of Georgia was leading this nation in executions, and I had a ringside seat. This did not make a Christian out of me. It certainly did change my thinking a lot. 2.5 years later, I came back to population, and I had a thought like this: when I go again, I'll go out that front door a free man, or I'll go out that back gate in a pine box. I give up. I can't beat you. And in my way of thinking for the next 7 years, I made what I called a good record. Now, I stayed drunk most of the time, but I stopped trying to escape, and I'd never done that before. And by this time, we had a part in a parole board over there in Georgia. And every year they would come down there and interview me and make a recording of my attitude and carry it back up to Capitol and play it. And after 7 years, they said, "Poor boy, we think you've been in long enough, but you've been too closely confined for too many years to be turned out with the public." You see, I didn't know anything about World War II. I had no trade. And to be honest with you, I could not express myself without using that language of the gutter. And those people knew about that. He said, "We're going to send you out to a road camp and let you mix and mingle with the people out there. And when you get used to being around folks again, we're going to give you a parole." And so they sent me over to Marietta, Georgia, to a state highway camp they had over there. And they told my kin folks that he's up there on trial, and if he'll stay up there a year and do good, we're going to give him a parole. And I felt like a misdemeanor then. I'd count the months off, the weeks, the days. And when that year was up, they sent me a big long envelope and said, "Stay another year." I could not for the life of me understand why folks would do something like that. I come to find out later on they did this for psychological reasons, see if I could stand a little disappointment, because I was a real weak individual. My attitude was, when my folks come out here Sunday, I'm going to get what little money they got and I'm going to leave, because I could have left real easy then. But all these years I'd been gone, my little old brother and sister had grown up, and they had families of their own, and they had all become church people. And I never could understand why they didn't talk to me about God. I guess they thought I was just a hopeless case. And when they came out there that Sunday morning, I was so bitter, the state of Georgia, and I began to raise Cain. And they just dropped their head and began to cry, and I didn't know how to fight anything like that. My sister says to me, "I know you don't have a God, but I do." She said, "There's a lot of folks praying for you. Please don't louse it up. Let me go back to the Capitol." And I owed my sister a lot, because she had run her legs off for many, many years trying to help me. But then, just like my mother, I took her for granted. You're my sister. You're supposed to do all these things, I thought. The very next day when I came in, they said, "Poor boy, you stay in the morning. Somebody be up here to get you. They're going to carry you up to the Capitol. They want to talk to you some more." I couldn't hardly sleep on that old bed that night for thinking about a God somewhere that my sister had so much faith in, that Mr. Moore had so much faith in. There's a lot of people came up there to represent me. I didn't know them. They're just friends of my family. And they said, "We're going to reconsider, and we'll let you know what our final decision is in about 2 weeks." And about 2 weeks later, I was paroled. I'd been in 20 years, 1 month and 2 weeks. And back in those days, when you made parole, somebody'd have to come pick you up and carry you home and bring you some clothes to wear. They didn't give you anything. And I never will forget, my sister brought me a pair of slacks and a sports shirt. And that was the first time in my life I'd ever owned a pair of breeches with a zipper on them. Now, honey, that turned me on. I'm telling you, I'd catch myself standing in front of the mirror going zip, zip, zip. And so I went home to live with my sister. And every time the doors of the church was open, my people would all go to church. And it was sort of a take it or leave it proposition now. You can go with us or you can stay here by yourself. And so out of curiosity, I went. And I went for all the wrong reasons. But there was one good thing that came out of me going to church. I met a little lady, and her name was Flo. 30 days later, Flo and I got married. We rented us some furnished rooms. There's 2 men in that church got me a job digging ditches for a plumbing company. I'm a good ditch digger. And I went to digging ditches, and Flo and I'd go to meeting on Sunday. I didn't drink liquor during this time. After a while, they made me a plumber's helper and gave me a dime raise. And I stayed with that until I got one of those little old cards that said that I was a journeyman plumber. And then I went out to Emory University and I got me a job as a plumber. And I worked out there 2 years and I didn't drink. I was on the job every day. And one morning they called me in the office and said, "Poor boy, your past is caught up with you, and we're going to have to let you go." I didn't handle disappointment too well. And that old attitude popped back up. "I'll get even with you. I'll show you." That old pride wouldn't let me go home and tell Flo what had happened. She would have understood. She was a much stronger person than I was. Every morning she'd put that bread and meat in a sack, and I'd leave like I was going to work, and I didn't have a job, and I didn't want one. I was mad. And I didn't know anything about legalized liquor and beer. And I walked in one of those honky-tonks, and I called myself getting even. I began to drink that stuff. And after a while, I'd be in such a condition I wouldn't go home. I didn't want Flo to see me like that. And then it wasn't too long, the police was looking for me again. I was doing some things I ought not have been doing. And I knew I was going to have to run again. And I wanted to see Flo just one more time before I run. And I got my brother to pick her up and bring her out to meet me at a little old motel. We spent the night out there that night. And the next morning I walked up to the bus stop with Flo, and I stood there and watched her get on that bus going back home. And Lord, I wanted to go home and Flo so bad I didn't know what to do. And I cried and I questioned myself as I have so many times. Why? Can't I be like other people? Why do I have to be this kind of a person? And I could come up with all kind of excuses, but deep down in my heart I couldn't find an answer. I'm an alcoholic. And so I went to another state. But that liquor there is just like it is in Georgia. And I carried that problem with me, and that was po' boy. The police picked me up in DTs just crazy as a bat. They sent me back to Atlanta and they put me under a $10,000 bond. My sister put up a home, everything she had to get me on the streets, walk the street at night and cry and feel sorry for po' boy. And I run again. And I went to another state. Got in there about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, everything closed up. Just had to find a drink somewhere. Nobody out on the streets to talk to. And finally I saw those neon lights flashing fancy wine and liquor, and I said, well, here's one. It was one, but it was closed too. They just had all the lights on. And I stood there in front of that big long plate glass window, and I could see those half a pints and fifths and quarts on shelves come right up to the glass. And I hit that glass with my fist, and the glass fell out all over me and all over the sidewalk, and I split my hand. And I didn't have sense enough to know I was cut, and I just stood there and filled my pockets full of bottles. You know, alcoholics do some pretty stupid things sometimes. But that just looked like the normal thing to do. And as I marched on up the street, uncorking one of those, they run up and throw the shotgun on me and carried me back down there. And I lied like a dog. I said I didn't do that. The man said, how in the world are you going to deny something like this? I said, I don't know, but I am and I did. And they put me in jail. And the next morning there was a city detective trying to question me, and I was about to go into convulsions. And he didn't want me to die on him, and he went back there and he got a glass that high full of good liquor. And I drank that glass of liquor. It probably saved my life. He said, don't you tell nobody I give you that. They kept me in jail 5 weeks, and the grand jury met and failed to indict me. And I couldn't understand that. They called me downstairs one evening about dark. It was in the wintertime. They opened the door and said, get, and I got. I thought they'd made a mistake, and I run 5 blocks till I give out. And I didn't know for a long, long time why them people turned me loose. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I was in a meeting over here in Maryville, Tennessee. And I was talking to a judge from that town, a city judge. And we was talking about that. And that judge told me, he said, poor boy, he said, I know that city detective. Said, that old boy's already gone on to that big meeting in the sky. He said, that man was an alcoholic. He said, he was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And said, he knows more about you than you did about yourself. Said he's the man that went before the grand jury and said if you just turn that idiot loose, he'll go back to Georgia and we won't have to fool with him. Yeah. It takes one to know one, don't it? That's exactly what I done. And I made my way on back to Flo to get what little money she had, walk streets, drink liquor, and feel sorry for poor boy. I'm an alcoholic, but I didn't know I was an alcoholic. About this time, I turned an old buddy out of mine out of the penitentiary. We'd run together for 50 years. And one evening we was going up the highway, about dark, both of us drunk, and old beat up Ford. And we had a flat tire. And right across the road was a filling station. So we went over there and bought a new tire, and the man said, pull your car over here in the yard and I'll put it on for you. So here's two drunks trying to get across the expressway, and there's a Thunderbird dealer from up in Old Howell. And him and his family was on the way to Florida on vacation. They run over us and tore up our car. And we jumped out and took that away from them. The law frowns on that too. And it wasn't so much as what happened, but it was because of our past. And they gave me and that old boy 20 more years. We both went back to Reedsville. Flo got a job working at night from 11 till 7 in the morning at a hospital. Write me a letter once a week, beg somebody to bring her to see me every 3 or 4 months. If I'd have had the nerve, I'd have cut my throat. I couldn't see no way to live 20 more years in them. And I sure didn't know how to pray. Flo kept on praying, and I know a lot of other people did, and I believe that God answered somebody's prayer, because 14 months later, they transferred me over to Stone Mountain Park, and that's where I live, near where I live now, and they're building a new prison camp there. And they sent me over there to put the plumbing in that new prison camp. And when we finished, the warden had us to install a little chapel out in one end of the mess hall. And he called me out on the front, and he said, poor boy, I have a different assignment for you every Sunday afternoon. He said, we're going to have a different church group from all over this area is going to be coming out here and holding services. And he said, I want you to stand by the door and welcome these people when they come in here. He said, I'm going to get some song books, and I want you to lead the singing. He said, I want you to go back there in that building and form a choir out of them convicts. And of all the dumb things, I wanted to do it. I ain't never figured that out yet. Our program tells us half measures avail us nothing. I never have believed in straddling that fence. I believe in being what you are. And I knew I wasn't in no kind of shape to do what the warden asked me to do. And I didn't know how to pray, but I'd seen those people in the death house pray. And I found me an altar. And it was an old black burnt hickory stump out in the woods. And I'll never forget it as long as I live, and I'll never be ashamed of it. I got so sick and so tired of the old way. And I dropped down on my knees by that old stump, and I said, God, if there is a God, whoever you are and wherever you're at, I give what's left, old poor boy, to you. I ain't going to run no more. I'm so tired. I'm just so tired. Something happened. I could stand here and talk all night, and I ain't smart enough to put it into words. But I know since that day, I've never wanted to rob, steal, or kill nobody since then. But I want to share something very important with you. He left me an alcoholic. And I hope I don't ever see that day when I think I'm cured, because I done seen what happened to some folks who thought they got cured. It was 5 years later. You know, from that time on in those church services, Flo would come out there and sit in those services, and I still had that number on the seat of my britches, but I felt sort of like I was free. Something had happened. I did form a choir. And the good Lord set one of them honky-tonk piano players in there and I put that joker to playing gospel music and formed a quartet. And the warden let me go out in the front yard with a bulldozer, and I built a baptizing pool and run hot and cold water out there. We turned it on. You know, I did that for the next 5 years because this God I talk about, he don't have to be in a great big hurry about nothing. He's always right on time. 5 years later, they told me one morning, I said, "Po boy, I just seen Flo go around the corner up there with your Sunday britches, and it like scared me to death. I thought maybe some of my kinfolks had died, and I was going to a funeral." But that wasn't the case. I come to find out somewhere between 6 and 7 years there, they had decided to parole me again. Flo and I went home that morning. We didn't know how to talk to each other. We couldn't have hired a lawyer. We didn't have $1.50 between us. But we knew where our help come from. There was a power bigger than us working somewhere. I went back to work at plumbing work for the next 3 years. I didn't drink liquor. Then I got involved with a gospel singing group, and I traveled around for the next 3 years, and I didn't drink liquor. And then I taken a job as maintenance man at a big motel. And of course, the liquor and the beer flowed real freely with all the conventions they were having. I didn't know I was an alcoholic. I can take it or I can leave it. And one day I decided I'd drink one of those good old cold Budweisers. My friends, when you read in that textbook that this is a progressive illness and it always gets worse and it never gets better, please believe it. How do you know, po boy? From personal experience, which is the best teacher I've ever found. I got drunk. And I stayed down the floor drunk for a year. There wasn't no turning back. Nobody knew what to do with me, and I couldn't help myself. I'm an alcoholic. Somebody told Flo, said, put him over in Peachtree Parkwood. She put me in the hospital. I went in there drunk and I come out drunk. Spent what money we'd saved up, and all the insurance was gone. They had a little deal going over there then. They thought they could taper you off. And every 2 hours around the clock for the first 3 days, they'd give you 2 ounces of 180 proof alcohol and a little fruit juice. Ha! And I conned him in and let me stay on an extra day because I was a real nervous person. So when I went out of there, I was still about drunk, done lost everything I had. And from then on, I'd have to go wherever they'd take me, and I stayed drunk. I was in those treatments and places so fast that no wonder I hadn't have died from exhaustion before I ever got to Alcoholics Anonymous. The last alcoholic hospital I was in, on Monday night, they announced that they had an AA meeting out in the lobby. And once again, out of curiosity, I went out there to see what they're talking about. And there was a very dear lady friend in that meeting that night, and she said I looked like a dead man. She came over after the meeting and said, po boy, do you want to get sober and stay sober? And I said, yes, ma'am, I sure God do, but I can't do it. I don't know how. She said, I'm not going to try to tell you how to do it, but I'll be glad to tell you how I did it. Now that got my attention. Here's somebody going to tell me how they did something. She gave me her phone number, and that was the most important phone call I ever made in my life. I called this gal, Sue. She got the little meeting book out. She looked up the closest meeting to where I was living at in Stone Mountain, which was the Glen Haven group, which is my home group today. She said, get yourself over there tonight. They got a meeting. And I went, scared to death, very suspicious, very skeptical, very doubtful. I didn't think anything would work for me. It was a discussion meeting. And I sat there in that meeting that night, and I heard those guys and gals say, my name's this, my name's that, and I'm an alcoholic. And I thought, if that's what an alcoholic is, what in the world am I? Them people, I'd have had to step way up here to get up where they was. And I started picking up a little hope. I thought, these people say they're alcoholics, and they talked about these same things that I was so well acquainted with. Maybe if I can just find out what they are doing, just maybe there's some hope for me. I asked somebody, I said, what do you do to be like y'all? They knew I was a nut, and they said, don't drink and go to meetings. See, if they'd have told me any more than that, I wouldn't know what they was talking about. And so I didn't drink, and I went to the meeting. Just to have somebody to shake my hand and say, "Hi, po' boy," that was good. I liked that. And so I didn't drink, and I went to the meeting. I'm the only person in my home group that ever give a birthday party in 6 months. Nobody thought I could stay sober a year. There was an old man in my home group. I just fairly despised him. Every time he'd open his mouth, he'd say, "The big book, the big book, the big book." I didn't want to hear that. Here I am, I ain't drinking, I'm going to meeting. How about giving me some credit? The night I had 6 months, his little old wife baked me a cake and brought it to the meeting and said, "Po' boy, 6 months." Now they figured if they can get me involved in something, I'll show up there for the meeting. So you had to have 6 months sobriety to be secretary. And this was the night they were going to elect a secretary. Now you know how these little AA elections go. Somebody said, "I nominate po' boy." Somebody said, "Second it." Somebody said, "Move the nomination be closed." Second that. So I became secretary. You know, I like that. I now own my own group. You know, I'd even tell people where they could sit and where they couldn't sit and all that stuff. But I stayed dry. And then I celebrated the birthday. And my term as secretary was up, so I lost that high position in AA and had to come down and be just a regular AA member. That tripped that old ego. And about 6 months later, don't drink, go to meeting, and then meetings started getting dull. They started getting boring. And I've become very critical of what them cats were sharing. My friends, that come as near getting me drunk as anything had happened since I got to this program. I knew that if I was going to stay away from that drink, I was going to have to get me a sponsor. And there was 2 things I had argued about ever since I got here. One of them was sponsorship, and the other one was an inventory. Guess who I asked to be my sponsor? That old mean man that talked about the big book. I went to him and I said, "Would you consider being my sponsor?" Now, he was one of them kind of fellows, he wouldn't open his mouth when he laughed. His old belly would just jump up and down. And his old belly began to jump. He said, "Po' boy, what makes you think you need a sponsor? I've already seen you celebrate a birthday." And I said something like I've heard so many other people say, "Well, my program ain't working too good." And his old belly jumped some more, and he said, "Oh, yes, it is. Your program's working real good. It was your program that got you to our program. And our program's called Alcoholics Anonymous." Yeah. He said, "Now, if I'm going to be your sponsor, the first thing we're going to have to do is get rid of your little old program before you get drunk." He said, "What do you think about that inventory?" I said, "I don't know how to do that." He said, "I know it." He said, "Will you make a beginning on it if I'll show you what to look for according to that book that says Alcoholics Anonymous on it?" He knew how to keep them props cut out from under him. And I said, "Yeah." And I started on an inventory with him helping me. And I remember one Sunday morning I called him and I said, "I have finished my inventory and I want to do that fifth step. He said, run that and buy me again. I said, I finished my inventory and I want to do that fifth step right quick. He said, you got a 12 and 12? I said, yeah. He said, turn to page 50. Read it. It said, four-step inventory was the beginning of a lifetime practice. I said, you through yet? No. Have you went as far as you know how to go? Yeah. I said, bring your inventory and come on over here. Me and my little wife went over there, and my wife stayed upstairs with his wife. He had that big book, and I had my inventory, and we went to the basement and shot the dope. And I did a fifth step. We talk about a spiritual awakening that comes as a result of these steps. My friend, I want to share something with you. I had a spiritual conniption fit that day down there. I just got started to talking and I couldn't quit. It just come pouring. It just come pouring. And when I'd done it according to my inventory, and we stood up, and picture in your mind, if you can, there's two big old ugly men standing up there, and we hugged each other's neck. And it's the first time in my life I ever told another man I loved him. He said, I love you, poor boy, for what you're trying to do. And I said, I love you for helping me. I got one brother that's living, and I love my brother. But I got news for you. I love my sponsor, too. My sponsor knows more about me than my brother does. There's one other human being in this world that knows everything that I know about poor boy Rice, as far as I'm concerned. And then when we get into making a list and making amends in this program, I needed that man, a good experienced AA member who had done this himself. Because I realized today I could have really loused up some things. That old boy lives over in Jackson, Mississippi now, but I get to visit him every once in a while, and I can call him on the telephone. He's still my sponsor. I want to share something with you, my friend, just because we don't drink liquor. That doesn't mean everything is just going to be beautiful. Things are still going to happen. They always have, and they always will. There's been a lot of good things that happened to me since I came to this program and became willing, with God's help, to follow these directions. And I think one of the most major good things that happened to me several years ago, I received something over at Georgia don't many people ever get unless they can prove their innocence, and I couldn't do that. I received a full, unconditional pardon from the state of Georgia. First time I'd been a free man since I was a little boy. I've been a lot of places, and Flo always followed me everywhere I'd go. She wouldn't talk. She'd sit and pray for me. In June of '85, Flo and I came out of a conference down in Albany, Georgia. We got back home Sunday afternoon, and the following weekend I suppose been in convention in Jackson, Mississippi. And on Tuesday morning, Flo and I was on our way to an AA meeting, and Flo had a stroke. And she went into the Rockdale County Hospital, and they kept her alive for 15 days on one of those life support machines. And then I lost Flo. And it seemed like my whole world just fell out from under me. Then in August, I suppose I'd been in the Southeastern Conference in Louisville. And I said, I can't go. I can't go no more. Joe Phelan, he's trustee over in that Southeastern region. Joe Phelan told me, said, poor boy, you can't stop now. You ain't running nothing. You go. I went, and I'm glad I did. But I could remember every time that we would be in a big meeting somewhere, Flo would always sit on that front row down there, And she'd asked me before it was my time to talk, honey, what kind of suit you gonna wear tonight? And I had two. I say, I'll wear that old brown one tonight. And Flo, she had an old brown slack suit. She wanted to dress like I was. She'd wear an old brown slack suit. She'd sit on that front row down there. Sometimes my knees would get wobbly, and I think I couldn't go on. I could look down that Flo, and them big brown eyes would be right on me. Flo believed I could do it. Share something else that good happened to you. A little less than 3 months ago, this little lady from Alabama here, Maria and I, we got married. We're still on our honeymoon. Action is the key word. If you don't do nothing, baby, there ain't nothing gonna happen. You know, anytime I'm in a big meeting or a little meeting, that new man, a new woman that's just coming through the door, my heart and my soul is centered on that new man and that new woman. God help us that we don't forget these new people, because remember one day we were new too. And I remember how suspicious and how skeptical I was. And somebody reached their hand out and said, welcome, po' boy. And in closing, I want to share something else with you. And this is based on personal experience, which is the best teacher I've ever found in my life. And it's simply this: the problem you have today, or the problem that may be out yonder in the future somewhere, it's never greater than this source of power that I've stood here this evening and tried to share with you. I thank you, people. God love you. I love all.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst and one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.